Spanish man marries a castizo woman. Their sons are Spanish, but it's not only a racial idea, but also a cultural idea that is behind here. If you see, there is a couple in a quiet room. The woman is carrying his baby. But if we say racialization equal to a cultural trait that is associated to this particular race. So, following these ideas, what happens is that this becomes an ideal and this becomes abnormal. In that sense, one notion of culture related to race become to be naturalized following the ideas of the Colombian elites during the 19th century. So this has also a counterpart in geographic terms. Most of the main population was located in the Andean region, in the other part of the country. This is the Andes part, you know. And as Marina was showing us this morning, this part was like understood as mulatto. This is like a festive, happy people, but lazy people, you know. This one like is associated to black people, that is people that have not enough intellectual ideas of how to progress. And the other part of the country, this one, was an Indian part, you know, where Indians lived there only to be drunk and pass waiting what will happen with them. So the counterpart of this geographic understanding of the country is the idea that the Andean population should populate the lowlands. And the population of these lowlands is equal to civilize these wild lands, you know? And the axe became like the main symbol of this process. What the axe means is the act of people cutting the trees and civilizing the wilderness. And as the same as you do with the forest, you have to do with the local indigenous peoples who live in these forested areas. You have to civilize them. So, in this first moment, the understanding of nature and culture creates what Boaventura de Souza calls an abyssal line between nature and culture, where nature represents the abnormal and cultures represent the normal. The culture is the culture of the Spaniards and the people who is educated by the Spaniards. And those people who are represented as near to nature are seen or are conceived as near nature. The second idea in this first moment is that to be a people near nature is to be less civilized. And nature itself is seen as an uncivilized domain that should be civilized through the axe. While uncivilized nature had to be masterized through men's work to serve human needs. That's another idea that is very important in that moment. This means that nature is there to satisfy human needs. And the last idea is that nature was clearly feminized and had to be domesticated industrialized and colonized. It's also a gender issue of how nature has been portrayed in this first moment. The second moment, I would like to show, or to call, like the moment of scientific colonization. This is a more recent moment. And it starts during the second half of 20th century. And one of the main projects to understand this scientific colonization is represented in a project called PRORADAM. It was the technical name, or the Amazon Radargrammetry project. That it was a project funded by the Colombian state and the Netherlands states. And this project runs during most of the 70s. And it started to create a scientific knowledge of what is happening in the Colombian Amazon. And one of the most interesting things of this project is it was created by an interdisciplinary team, including anthropologists, including botanists, including economists, etc. And they try to figure out how to stereotype local populations in the Amazon area. So they divide the local population into huge groups: white people and indigenous people. And in that terms, white and indigenous. And in the case of white people, they start to identify where and what were their main cultural traits. You can see in this column the main traits, cultural traits or values of white people, and here you can see the core values of indigenous people. And this is a table that is resulting from anthropologists, economists, trying to define who are these peoples. White have analytical thought, indigenous have synthetic thought, white have profitable technology, indigenous have environmental technology, white have trade values, indigenous have use values. And if you see what this table is trying to say is that there is a people who should live in the Amazon area and other people who shouldn't live there. And by conclusion, the people who shouldn't live there are the white. You know, the Amazon is for indigenous people, not for white people, according to this table. So this is the kind of representation of many technical and scientific representation of these communities. And after this study, the program study, the Colombian state started the Amazonian police in 1990, who was like the first moment where the Colombian state radically changed its understanding of indigenous communities. Until that moment, the Colombian state was trying to civilize indigenous peoples. But until this point, after this point, the Colombian state started to say, okay, indigenous peoples are important, but are important because of their knowledge of environmental processes, and we have to keep them in these areas in order to protect the forest. And this is very important because in a very aggressive manner, the Colombian states start to create indigenous territories in the Colombian Amazon. Do you remember the red areas in the Colombian map? Those areas start to be created at this moment. So the Amazonian policy have a main objective. It was to convert the Colombian Amazon into a great territory legally protected by establishing of reservation, resguardos, parks and nature reserves, so as to turn into reality the preservation of the immeasurable cultural and ecological riches which are found there. At this moment, the President of the Republic stated, the forest and indigenous inhabitants constitute a biotic cultural structure of marvelously subtle integration. The traditional forms of life matches nature. So, according to this argument, the Colombian state is saying indigenous people don't divide nature and culture. So, we have to protect this because this is a key idea to preserve the Amazon area. So, there is a very interesting argument in the Amazonian policy, which is related to the fact that many anthropologists who work in this program try to portray a cultural anthropological argument of why indigenous people were important for protecting the Amazon. And you can see in that quote how there are like a very romantic appeal of the cosmic vision of the indigenous peoples who are recycling energy, and by doing that they are contributing to the preservation of the Amazon. But this is not a particular case in the context of Colombia. This is a broader process which is closely related to things happening in other parts of the world. For example, if you see these kind of images, you see, okay, yes, these people is really exotic, these people is really near nature, you know, the feathers, the colors, is saying, okay, these people is really interesting. But in a broader sense, what is happening is the positioning of these debates at the court of Western media. During the 80s, what happened was like people like Sting, you know, the singer, was concerned with the fights of very tiny indigenous Brazilian populations trying to fight against these massive projects of development in the Amazon area. And this become an issue of global concern. But if you see what is under the pictures, there is always an idea that cultural difference is so radical that we start to almost like animalize, I don't know if that's the correct word, the understanding of what these people do. They are like animals living in the forest, you know, and we have to keep out of these people. That's a very polemic argument. So, anthropologists, I am an anthropologist, have a lot of responsibility on this process, of this understanding. You know, this is a very popular cartoon among anthropologists, where we try to understand these people like a radical alterity that doesn't have any in common with us. But we have a lot of things in common. Also, if you see, the ecological arguments start to influence in these stereotypes. The painting of the right is part of a very polemic and influential book of Mark Chapin, who is a challenge to conservationists. And that's the idea of how conservation discourses also are based in many cases in an essentialization of indigenous communities. But beyond these global processes, the fact is in Colombia, during the late 80s, more or less 16 million of hectares were designated as lands for natives. Where, as we have seen, in most of these areas, where are frontier areas, and also where are the most biodiverse areas of the country. So, at some extent, the Colombian state built a very essentialized understanding of what an indigenous community is, as at the same time as he built